Before you dive into this gripping tale of betrayal and triumph, ask yourself, what happens when a picture-perfect life shatters in front of the world? Can humiliation become the catalyst for true liberation? If you're ready to witness a woman reclaim her power and rewrite her destiny, then hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss another inspiring story. And tell us in the comments, what city or country are you listening from? We'd love to know how far this story reaches. Chapter 1. The Shattered Facade. The golden dome of the Grand Regent Palace shimmered under the light of massive crystal chandeliers. The opulence of the venue reflected the magnitude of the event. The marriage between Isabel Wright and Marcus Sterling was the union of two illustrious lineages, a perfect combination of the Wright family's economic might and the Sterling family's aristocratic, though faded, status. London's elite had gathered that night, dressed in gala attire, champagne flutes in hand, expecting to witness an event worthy of the covers of the most exclusive magazines. The atmosphere was exquisite, calculated down to the last detail. A string quartet played a piece by Debussy. Waiters glided with silver trays of caviar canapés, and chandeliers cast golden sparkles onto the impeccable marble floor of the ballroom. From the outside, it seemed like a perfect wedding, the epitome of romance and sophistication. But inside Isabel's chest, there was a disquiet she couldn't dispel. She wore an exclusive Ilara couture design, an ivory silk gown with a multi-meter train, hand-embroidered with gold thread. Her hair, gathered in an impeccable bun, exposed her elegant neck, and the diamond tiara her mother had passed down as a symbol of family tradition. But beneath all that perfection, her skin burned with a sense of alert she couldn't ignore. All eyes were on her, admiring her, envying her. But no one saw the truth. No one perceived the invisible weight of that commitment that felt less like a step towards happiness and more like a sentence. Marcus, on the other hand, exuded confidence. With his aristocratic bearing, his impeccably tailored black suit, and his rehearsed smile, he walked among the guests like a host in his own kingdom. Since the reception began, he had behaved with that false gallantry that only Isabel could distinguish. He would whisper sarcastic comments in her ear when no one was listening, squeeze her waist tighter than necessary, and correct her posture with a dry murmur. It wasn't love. It was dominance. But the decisive moment arrived with the wedding cake. It was a confectionery masterpiece, a 5-tiered structure, covered in white fondant with edible gold details, designed to represent the grandeur of the occasion. Photographers positioned themselves strategically, while guests crowded around with their phones ready to immortalize the moment. Isabel held the silver knife with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Marcus, beside her, radiated satisfaction. She cut the first slice, following protocol. He took a small piece with his fingers and brought it towards his lips. It was a symbolic gesture, the first shared bite as husband and wife. But then, the unexpected happened. Instead of bringing the piece to his mouth or tenderly to Isabel's, Marcus squeezed the cake between his fingers and smeared it directly onto her face. The impact was instantaneous. Cold frosting spread across her skin, covering her cheek and nose. A sepulchral silence fell over the ballroom. No one laughed. No one found it funny. Only Marcus, who let out a mocking laugh, expecting her to react with the submission he had always demanded. But Isabel did not react as he expected. Her heart pounded, but not from shame, not from sadness. It was rage. She could feel the sweet stickiness sliding down her chin, the mixture of expensive flavors on her tongue. Camera flashes flickered in her periphery, capturing her humiliation in real time. She felt everyone's eyes on her, But the only thing she saw was Marcus, the man she had decided to marry. He was now fully revealed. It wasn't the cake. It wasn't the public embarrassment. It was the absolute certainty that he would never respect her. He looked at her, waiting for her reaction. Did he expect her to laugh? To play the same game? To surrender to the scene like an obedient wife? Isabel closed her eyes for an instant. She took a deep breath, and in that moment, she knew it. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It wasn't an impulsive gesture. It was a declaration of power. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer the same. Something inside her had changed, and Marcus, still with his smirk of superiority, didn't notice. The silence in the ballroom continued to weigh like a marble slab. Only the faint murmuring of the guests broke the stillness, a murmur laden with incredulity and tension. The faces of London's elite oscillated between bewilderment and discomfort, but no one dared to intervene. Isabel could feel every gaze on her skin, the sticky frosting still adhering to her cheek. She raised a trembling hand to her face, not to wipe herself clean, but to cling to the last shred of control she had left. Marcus continued to laugh. "Come on, my love," he said mockingly, with that conceited voice Isabel knew too well. "Don't make that face. It's a joke, just a joke." His dark eyes watched her with the expectation of someone accustomed to receiving submission without resistance. But something inside her fractured. For years, she had ignored the signs. She had rationalized the red flags as mere nuances of Marcus's character. But now, under the golden light of the chandeliers, and before the gaze of hundreds of people, the truth became impossible to disguise. This marriage was not love. It never was. The Wright family and the Sterling family had sealed their commitment with the same coldness with which business deals are closed. Isabel's family, owners of one of the country's most influential art gallery networks, had considered this union a strategic transaction. For them, Marcus was a man of lineage, a descendant of an aristocracy that, though diminished, still retained some political influence. For the Sterlings, Isabel was a golden ticket, the key to rescuing their decadent legacy. And she, naive, had believed that with time, she could transform this alliance into something real. She had wanted to believe in him. From the beginning, Marcus had been charming, impeccable in his role as a sophisticated man. His soft words, his calculated gestures, the way he made her feel special when it suited him. He knew exactly how to manipulate her, how to make her doubt her own perceptions, how to wrap her in empty promises. But now, everything was crumbling. The murmurs intensified when Isabel took a step back, moving away from Marcus. He raised an eyebrow. "Amusing. Don't be melodramatic, my love," he said in a low voice, loud enough for those closest to him to hear. "No one here wants to see a scene." Isabel felt her blood boil. A scene. He had humiliated her in front of everyone. He had exposed his lack of respect without even blinking. And now he expected her to bow her head and continue the charade. No, not anymore. She took a deep breath, feeling the sweet scent of the cake mix with the expensive perfume of the guests, with the metallic smell of champagne in the air. Her mind raced frantically to every warning she had ignored. The day he dismissed her achievements at the gallery with a simple, "They gave it to you because of your surname." The times he had corrected her in public, as if her voice needed to be filtered through him before being valid. The subtle criticisms disguised as jokes, the comments that turned her independence into an offense, the moments when his touch became a little stronger, a little more controlling. She had believed they were small things. She had believed she could handle it. "Isabel," Marcus hissed through gritted teeth, taking a step closer. His jaw tensed when he noticed his wife wasn't reacting as he expected. "Don't make this bigger than it is." But it was too late. Isabel looked at him with a clarity she had never possessed. And in that instant, she knew that her mistake hadn't just been marrying Marcus. Her mistake had been thinking she could change him. Her brother, James's voice pulled her from her trance. "Are you all right?" he whispered, appearing by her side. His tone wasn't just concern. It was a warning. Marcus heard the question and frowned. "Of course she's all right," he answered for her. "It's just cake." James looked at him with the contempt he had never tried to hide. "I wasn't talking to you." The tension in the air became unbearable. Some guests exchanged nervous glances. Others awaited the outcome with morbid curiosity. Everyone knew something was about to explode. Marcus turned to Isabel, leaning in just enough to speak into her ear. "Isabel, behave yourself." It was that whisper that condemned him. Isabel felt the ice on her back, the certainty that he had never seen her as his equal, only as something that had to behave to serve his purpose. And then, she made a decision. A second later, she took off her veil and let it fall to the floor. The jewels in her hair glittered under the lights as her hands trembled slightly. But it wasn't fear. It was the adrenaline of someone finally waking up. The murmurs turned into choked gasps when she, head held high, removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table, next to the cake Marcus had used to humiliate her. For the first time all night, he lost his smile. "What are you doing?" His tone was no longer mocking. It was sharp. It was fear. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The guests' eyes followed her in disbelief as Isabel turned on her heels and walked towards the exit. There were no shouts. There was no unnecessary drama. Only the echo of her heels resounding on the marble as she left behind not only the wedding, but the biggest mistake of her life. And Marcus, standing in the middle of the ballroom, understood that he had just lost control. The sound of her heels still resonated in the golden hallways of the Grand Regent Palace when a firm hand stopped her. "Don't you dare make a scene, Isabel." It was Marcus. His voice no longer held any trace of mockery. It was an order. She turned slowly. The ballroom lights glinted on her frosting-smeared cheeks, but her expression was icy. There were no tears, no pleas, only determination. Marcus clenched his jaw, his dark eyes piercing her with contained rage. Control was slipping from his hands, and he knew it. "Go back to the ballroom, now." The air around them crackled with electricity. A few meters away, a group of guests pretended not to look, but the buzz was undeniable. The scandal was taking shape. Isabel felt a wave of disgust. How long had she spent justifying this man, convincing herself that he was someone with whom she could build a life? "Not anymore. Let go of my arm." Her voice was low, firm, without a trace of supplication. Marcus hesitated. He had never heard her speak like that. She had always been the perfect woman, the one who met expectations without questioning them. But now, standing before him with her dignity intact, she made him feel exposed. He gritted his teeth and released her. "Don't be ridiculous. Everyone is looking." He ran a hand through his hair, trying to regain composure. He looked around and noticed a group of businessmen observing him with discreet attention. His image was at stake. It was then that he changed his strategy. "Come on, Isabel," he said with a forced smile. "We're not going to ruin such an important night over a misunderstanding, are we?" She looked at him without blinking. "A misunderstanding? Yes, it was just a joke. You're overreacting." Marcus leaned slightly towards her, lowering his voice. "Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. How many times had she heard that word come from his mouth? When he belittled her first exhibition in New York and she got upset. When he forgot her birthday and she dared to mention it. When he interrupted her at a dinner with his family and she asked him not to. Dramatic. It wasn't the first time, but it would be the last. Before she could respond, a new voice interrupted. "Isabel, is everything all right?" It was James, her brother, accompanied by a couple of family friends. His expression was tense, his posture protective. There was no trust in his gaze, only alertness. Marcus changed his attitude instantly. His smile reappeared, the one he used to manipulate situations in his favor. "Everything's fine, brother-in-law. Just a small misunderstanding." James didn't believe him for a second, but he also didn't want to escalate the scandal further. "You should go clean your face," he told Isabel gently. "I'll go with you." She nodded and took a step towards her brother, but Marcus wasn't going to let her go that easily. "See what you're doing, Isabel?" His tone dropped. His smile hardened. "Are you going to make a spectacle?" She didn't answer. It wasn't worth it anymore. And she left, without looking back at him. The bathroom was empty when Isabel saw herself in the mirror. A distorted version of herself looked back. The white dress, impeccable, contrasted with the sweet stains on her face. It was the perfect image of what her relationship had been, a disguise of perfection covering a bitter truth. She took a deep breath and grabbed a damp towel. As she cleaned her face, she also cleaned the blindfold from her eyes. When she returned to the ballroom, everything had changed. The murmurs were more intense, the furtive glances more frequent. The gossip had already taken on a life of its own. In the distance, she saw Marcus surrounded by a group of businessmen. He seemed relaxed, but she knew him too well. She knew he was annoyed. She knew he was losing control of the narrative. She walked towards the main table with her head held high. She would not allow him to reduce her to the humiliated wife who needed to be comforted. But when she was close enough, she heard something that stopped her dead in her tracks. It's no surprise she reacted that way. She's always been temperamental. Marcus was talking to the investors, and he was talking about her. I mean, you have to understand her. She's lived a privileged life. She's always had it easy. I guess the first real inconvenience makes her react this way. Isabel felt a wave of icy indignation course through her body. Marcus laughed lightly and took a sip of his whiskey. He knew perfectly well she was there, listening. But that's how they are, aren't they? Sometimes they forget that without their surname, they'd be nothing. The slap of his comment was stronger than any previous humiliation. A knot formed in her throat, not from sadness, but from fury. The men at the table exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one dared to answer him. "Is that how you talk about me when I'm not around?" Isabel's voice resonated with a coldness that made Marcus turn his head immediately. The silence at the table became absolute. Marcus blinked, surprised that she had had the audacity to confront him. "Isabel, please." "No, continue. I want to hear it all." He clenched his jaw. For an instant, his mask cracked. The charming man disappeared, and the real Marcus appeared. Arrogant, hurtful, cruel. "Come on, Isabel. We all know your career wouldn't exist without your family. It's a gallery, not an empire. Don't pretend you got where you are on your own." Rage rose to her throat. "You're right. My family gave me opportunities. But tell me, Marcus, what has yours given you?" A murmur ran through the table. He felt the blow. "Excuse me? I mean, if we're going to talk about who is relevant without their surname, you don't even have a career to boast about." The investors looked away, uncomfortable. What she had just said was a direct hit. Marcus had no businesses of his own. He lived off his family's reputation, old contacts, appearances. He had always played at being influential, but in reality, he was nothing more than an opportunist. And now, everyone knew it. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain composure, but it was too late. "I need to talk to you, alone." She stared at him, and for the first time in years, she felt no fear of him. There's nothing left to say. And then, in an unexpected turn, Isabel took her champagne glass and toasted. "To the men who think they can fool everyone, but end up fooling themselves." Marcus looked at her with fury, but he could do nothing, because his mask had fallen. The atmosphere at the Grand Regent Palace had changed. It was no longer a wedding. It was a scandal in the making. The guests continued their conversations. Champagne glasses were still being filled. The orchestra's music still played, but everything had a forced air. It was a charade. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Small, furtive glances, tense smiles, whispers behind silk fans, and cut glass tumblers. No one said it out loud, but everyone thought the same thing. Marcus Sterling was not the powerful man he tried to appear. At another table, a group of businessmen exchanged comments in low voices. Men who had previously shaken Marcus's hand with respect now spoke with a different caution. Doubts, that was the word. Doubts about whether he had bet too high. She didn't look very happy when she left, one of the guests whispered, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Did you see it? She took off her veil and left it. Not a good sign. Another man, an investor who had considered doing business with Marcus, exhaled and shook his head. His family won't let this go. The scales were tipping. The same people who had laughed with Marcus before, who had flattered him, who saw his marriage to Isabel as an opportunity to make connections with the right family, now reconsidered their options. And if all this ended in disaster, Marcus felt that change. He perceived it as a chill down his spine. He was a man who had built his reputation on foundations of smoke. He knew that if he didn't regain control now, he would lose it forever. That's why he followed her. As soon as Isabel left the event hall, he went after her. He caught up with her in one of the hallways connecting to the palace's private gardens. He took her arm with a firmness that, though controlled, made his frustration clear. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" She didn't turn immediately. She closed her eyes for a second, feeling the weight of that question. It wasn't the first time Marcus had held her like this. It wasn't the first time he had tried to manipulate her. But this was the first time she was no longer afraid. When she finally turned to him, her expression was one of pure contempt. "I'm doing what I should have done from the beginning." Marcus clenched his jaw. There was contained rage in his gaze. "Are you going to ruin everything over a stupid piece of cake?" He scoffed, though his voice trembled with a slight desperation. "Don't be childish, Isabel." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Childish? No. Childish is you thinking I'm going to go along with this after what you did." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He couldn't lose his head. Not there. Not with everyone watching what was happening. "Listen." His tone became lower, more measured, as if he were negotiating a contract. "What happened in there was a mistake, a misunderstanding. We'll fix it. There's nothing to fix. Do you really think your family is going to let this end like this?" Now his voice became colder, sharper. "Do you think they're going to accept the ridicule of a canceled wedding on the same night?" Isabel felt a pang in her chest. He knew where to hit. The Wright family had built their empire on reputation and impeccable strategies. A scandal of this magnitude was a stain on their name. But Marcus didn't understand that she was no longer playing by his rules. "My family will take care of what they need to do." Her voice didn't tremble. "But I'm not going through with this." Marcus let out an ironic laugh and shook his head. "And what do you plan to do? Annul the marriage?" "Yes." His smile disappeared. For the first time, real fear appeared on his face. "You can't do that." "Yes, I can." He ran a hand over his face, nervous. His control was cracking faster than he could repair it. "Listen, darling." He tried to soften his tone, but his desperation seeped into every word. "Don't be impulsive. Not after everything we've planned." What they had planned. Not what they had built together. Not what they had dreamed. Isabel felt nauseous. "You know what will happen if we do this now. Your family will lose credibility. It will look like a public offense to the Sterlings. Is that what you want?" Guilt was his last card. He had used it so many times that it almost seemed like an automatic reflex. And for an instant, it worked. Isabel hesitated. She thought of her father, her mother, the critical glances of society that didn't forgive weaknesses. Marcus noticed and pressed harder. You don't have to make this decision now. Let's talk tomorrow, calmly. We'll sit down with the lawyers. We'll find a smart solution. A solution that would benefit him. Isabel understood in that instant. Marcus wasn't trying to save their relationship. He was trying to save himself, because without her, he was nothing. The power had changed hands, and he knew it. She stared at him with absolute clarity. I'm not going to talk to the lawyers tomorrow, Marcus. I'm going to talk to them now. He blinked. His face went from contained anger to absolute coldness. Don't do this, Isabel. She took a step back. Her expression held no fear, only determination. I already did. And she left him there, in that golden hallway, with his desperation reflected in every shadow of the chandeliers. Isabel returned to the ballroom with firm steps, feeling the heat of every gaze piercing her back. She knew everyone was waiting for her next move. The music continued to play, but it had lost its purpose. Guests spoke in murmurs, pretending to disguise their discomfort, but it was impossible to hide the tension hanging in the air. The scandal was already real. In the distance, Marcus had resumed his seat at the main table, a glass of whiskey in his hand and a frown on his face. His posture feigned calm, but she knew him too well. She knew he was annoyed. She knew he was losing control of the narrative. He was losing control, and he knew it, but he hadn't yet accepted defeat. Isabel advanced without deviating, feeling her heart pound with overwhelming force. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. The dress weighed on her body. The veil brushed the floor with a subtle rustle. She was the image of a perfect bride, but it was all a lie. When she reached the center of the ballroom, she felt conversation slowly die down. Everyone's eyes were fixed on her. It was time. Slowly, she raised her hands to her head and slid off the veil. The gesture, seemingly simple, was a devastating blow. The veil fell to the floor like a leaf in autumn, soft but definitive. There was no turning back. Marcus immediately stood up, his chair scraping against the marble with a dry sound. What are you doing? His voice struggled to remain controlled, but his panic was evident. Isabel didn't respond. She removed her wedding ring with calculated precision. The diamond, once a symbol of a shared future, was now just a worthless stone in her hand. She dropped it onto the table with a faint clink against the glass. The sound, though insignificant, resonated like a gunshot in the room. Marcus took a step towards her, his hand extended, as if trying to stop the inevitable collapse of his world. Isabel! But she had already made her decision. Without a scream, without a single tremor in her voice, without tears, she turned and began to walk towards the exit. The murmuring among the guests transformed into a river of choked reactions. No one could believe what they were seeing. Phone cameras subtly rose, the moment the bride abandoned her own marriage. Investors watched in silence, some exchanging glances of understanding. The ridicule was not for Isabel, it was for Marcus, and he knew it. Isabel! His voice finally betrayed his desperation. She didn't stop. Her heels echoed on the marble. Every step she took was another fracture in the image Marcus had built. Every meter she moved away, he became more insignificant. He tried to follow her, but James appeared out of nowhere, placing himself in front of him with a fierce look. No. Marcus looked at him with rage. He knew he couldn't push him. He couldn't react violently in front of everyone. He couldn't afford to lose anymore. So he stayed there, watching his wife. No, his ex-wife. Leave the venue with her head held high. When the large wooden door closed behind her, he knew he had lost everything. Chapter 2. The Aftermath. London burned that night with golden lights. Traffic snaked along avenues, an endless river of white and red headlights. From the presidential suite of the Four Seasons, the city panorama was an imposing spectacle. But inside the room, the atmosphere was pure tension. Isabel sat on a dark velvet sofa, her wedding dress still impeccable, though the absence of the veil and the ring made it clear that the illusion was over. She looked serene, but the energy in her body was electric. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Across from her, James Wright paced back and forth, his cell phone pressed to his ear. His black suit was still perfectly fitted, but his tie was loosened, and his gestures were quick, emotioned. He wasn't a man who lost control easily, but tonight it was personal. No, Arthur, I want it now. Not tomorrow, not in 2 days, now. His voice was sharp, his patience non-existent. Draft the annulment request and send it to the Sterling's office before dawn. I don't want Marcus to have a second to react. On the other side of the sofa, her mother, Eleanor Wright, remained silent, her glass of red wine trembling slightly in her hand. She wasn't a woman who showed weakness, ever. But tonight, her dark eyes reflected a mixture of fury and disappointment. What a disgrace, she finally whispered, breaking the room's silence. He used us. Isabel closed her eyes for a moment. Yes, Marcus had never loved her. He had never wanted a marriage. He only wanted access to the Wrights' money and power. James abruptly hung up the call and tossed his phone onto the table. The lawyer is already on his way. We're going to dismantle this mess before Marcus even understands what happened. Isabel looked up, her hands firmly clasped in her lap. Can he fight the annulment? James scoffed. He can try, but he has nothing to fight with. We haven't signed anything that benefits him. Eleanor placed her glass on the table with more force than necessary. But he will fight, James. A man like Marcus doesn't let himself be humiliated without a fight. Isabel knew her mother was right. Marcus wasn't going to accept defeat in silence. And she wasn't wrong. A few miles away, in the enormous Sterling mansion, Marcus entered like a storm. His tie was already off, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. Damn it! He threw a glass against the marble wall, the crystal exploding into 1,000 pieces. His mother, Lady Caroline Sterling, watched him from one of the chairs in the living room. Her posture rigid, but her expression impenetrable. She said nothing. His father, Lord Richard Sterling, a man who had once been respected in high society circles, but now lived in the shadows of his surname, rubbed his face in frustration. Tell me you at least have something in your favor. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to calm down. He knew he needed to regain control. The marriage is still valid, he said through clenched teeth. There's still room to negotiate. Lady Caroline exhaled with disdain. Negotiate what? With what face are you going to sit down and ask for something when your wife left you in front of all of London? Marcus felt a pang of anger. He hated that word. Left. As if he wasn't in control. As if he were the loser. I'm going to talk to her. Lord Richard let out a sarcastic laugh. Don't be an idiot. Isabel is no longer an option. Marcus closed his eyes, his jaw tensing. No, he wouldn't accept that. He leaned over the table, his dark eyes shining with dangerous intensity. The Wright family won't want a bigger scandal than they already have. If they play their cards right, they can silence this. Lady Caroline stared at him. And what if they don't? Marcus smiled. But it wasn't a smile of tranquility. It was the smile of someone who refuses to lose. Then, I'll do it my way. Back in the suite, the door burst open. The Wrights' lawyer, Arthur Davies, entered with a briefcase in hand and an urgent expression. We have to act fast. James took the documents and began reviewing them without losing a second. Every clause was designed to eliminate any possibility of Marcus getting a penny. "Isabel," Arthur said, approaching her. "Are you completely sure?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, there's nothing to save." Arthur nodded and slid the document in front of her. "Sign here." Isabel took the pen. Her hand didn't tremble. With a single stroke, she broke the last connection that tied her to Marcus Sterling. James smiled with satisfaction. "Let the notification reach him before dawn. I want him to read it with the worst hangover of his life." Eleanor watched her daughter in silence. Then she took her hand firmly. "I'm proud of you." Isabel felt a knot in her throat, but she didn't cry. She had no reason to. She had reclaimed her life. And Marcus, in his mansion, still didn't know that the war was already lost. The sun had fully risen over London when Marcus's cell phone began to vibrate insistently on the bedside table of his suite in the Sterling mansion. The irritating ring mixed with the dull ache in his head, a remnant of the previous night, which had ended with more alcohol than strategy. He stirred in bed, the linen sheets twisted, and reached out with a sharp movement to grab the device. On the screen, the name of his lawyer, Thomas Price, glowed insistently. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment before answering. He knew it wasn't good news. "What is it?" he snarled, his voice hoarse and impatient. "You have to come to my office, now." Marcus frowned. He never liked Thomas's anxious tone. "Just tell me." The silence on the other end was brief, but long enough for Marcus to feel a jolt of alarm. The rights annulled the marriage before it was consummated. Marcus sat up in bed with a jolt. "What?" "Listen carefully. Isabel signed the annulment last night. Her lawyers sent the documentation while you were sleeping. Legally, you and she were never married." The room seemed to shrink around him. He ran a hand over his face, trying to absorb the information. This couldn't be happening. "That's impossible." "It's a fact, Marcus. You have no right to anything. There are no agreements signed in your favor, no access to the rights accounts. There is absolutely nothing you can claim." Marcus leaped out of bed, pacing the room like a caged animal. "They must have made a legal mistake." "There isn't one. James Wright played his cards well, and the worst part isn't even that." Marcus clenched his teeth. "The worst part? What else?" Thomas let out a heavy sigh. "The scandal is already in the press. All of London knows Isabel left you at the altar." Marcus clenched his fists, his eyes burning with pure rage. His reputation. "Tell me we at least have a way to respond. If there had been a signed contract, we could fight. But there isn't one. You can't demand compensation. You can't claim assets. You have nothing. You have..." Marcus threw his cell phone against the wall with force. The device shattered into pieces. A void gripped his chest, then was quickly replaced by a fury that threatened to consume him. Isabel had destroyed him. He grabbed the first shirt he found, dressing with rough movements. He couldn't leave things like this. He would not accept defeat. He stormed out of the room, his steps echoing through the mansion's marble hallway. Downstairs, he found Lady Caroline Sterling, his mother, sitting in the main living room, a newspaper in her hands and an expression of disgust on her face. She slowly looked up at her son. "What a disgrace." Marcus stopped in the middle of the living room, still seething. "What disgrace? They screwed me over, Mom." Lady Caroline threw the newspaper onto the coffee table. On the cover, a brutal headline. "Wedding of the year ended before it began. Isabel Wright abandons Marcus Sterling at the altar." Marcus felt a pang in his stomach. "It's a public humiliation." Lady Caroline's voice was icy. "And all because you couldn't control your wife." Marcus slammed his hand on the table, knocking over an empty glass in the process. "Isabel isn't my wife. She never was, thanks to those damn lawyers." Lady Caroline stared at him with a look filled with disdain. "Exactly. And now you have nothing." Marcus felt his eyes burn with fury. It's not over yet. Lord Richard Sterling, his father, entered the room at that moment. He already seemed aware of the tragedy. Of course it's over. His voice sounded like a sharp knife. You're left without a marriage, without money, and without allies. Marcus turned to him, rage pulsating in his veins. I can still fix this. Lord Richard let out a dry laugh. Fix what? Your dignity? That was lost last night, son. Marcus tasted defeat in his mouth, but he wouldn't accept it. Not yet. Without saying anything more, he grabbed his car keys and left the mansion. He was going after Isabel, and this time, he wasn't going to lose. The rain was beginning to fall over London when Marcus abruptly braked in front of the Four Seasons, his tires skidding on the wet asphalt. The cold of dawn seeped into his clothes, but the heat of his fury was much greater. He got out of the car and handed the keys to the valet without even looking at him. His mind had only one objective: Isabel. The hotel's mirrored windows reflected his own face. Dark eyes, a tense jaw, ill-disguised desperation behind the arrogance. He couldn't let her win. Not now. He strode through this reception like a whirlwind, ignoring the discreet glances of the employees. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew why he was there. Mr. Sterling, Ms. Wright is not receiving visitors, the receptionist said, her voice rehearsed but with a slight tremble. Don't make me repeat myself, Marcus snarled, his eyes fixed on the man. Give me her room number. The receptionist hesitated. I'm going to have to ask you to. Marcus was no longer listening. He crossed the lobby, ignoring any rules, any limits. The elevator was too slow, so he climbed the stairs, taking 2 steps at a time, feeling his breath quicken with each step. Isabel couldn't do this to him, not after everything. When he reached the door of the presidential suite, he knocked hard. Isabel! The silence from the other side only made his blood boil more. Open the damn door! No response. He clenched his fists. He knew she was there, so he tried one last time. If you don't open, I'm coming in anyway. On the other side of the door, Isabel took a deep breath. Her heart pounded, but her face showed no emotion. James, leaning against the room wall, crossed his arms. You don't have to talk to him. Isabel looked at him. Her brother had always been her strength, her protection, but this fight was hers. Yes, I have to. Before James could argue, she turned the doorknob and opened the door. Marcus stopped for a moment, as if deep down he hadn't expected her to answer. His eyes scanned her face, looking for any doubt, any hesitation. But he found nothing. Isabel was calm, too calm. That infuriated him even more. You're going to listen to me. She didn't move. She didn't leave room for him to enter. She just crossed her arms and waited. Marcus ran a hand through his wet hair, taking a deep breath, trying to regain control. He had to bring her back into the game. You can't do this to me. His voice came out less firm than he wanted. You can't destroy us this way. Isabel tilted her head slightly. We never existed. Marcus clenched his teeth. She spoke as if he had meant nothing. He took a step forward, ignoring the fact that she didn't back away. Isabel, think. This isn't just a relationship. It's a pact between our families. If you leave me like this, it becomes a disaster. She blinked slowly, absorbing every word. For whom? Marcus clenched his fists. For everyone. For you and for me. For you. And there it was. The truth slipping out like the rain outside. Marcus felt a knot in his throat. He couldn't let her have the last word. You know what the press is saying, right? His voice dropped, becoming more dangerous. That you were impulsive. That it was a rich girl's whim. If you go through with this, they're going to tear you apart. Isabel's heart pounded. She knew he wasn't lying, but she also knew Marcus needed her to be afraid. So she smiled. Small. Cruel. If you think I care what they say, then you never knew me. The frustration in Marcus's eyes grew. You can't do this. He shook his head, his voice losing strength. "You can't throw everything away." Isabel kept her gaze fixed on him. Finally, she saw Marcus as he really was. Not a powerful man, not an unshakable aristocrat, just a desperate opportunist. "I already did." Marcus felt as if the air had been ripped from his lungs. For a moment, it seemed he was going to insist, that he was going to say something. Try another move. One last trick. But then, he saw in her eyes that there was nothing left to do. No argument, no threat, no plea. It was over. He had lost. Isabel took a step back and held the door. "Go, Marcus." He stood there for another second. Then he let out a trembling sigh, looked away, and retreated. The door closed in front of him. Marcus stood in the hallway, feeling the humiliation embed itself in his skin like a slow poison. It was all over, and for the first time, Isabel was free. Chapter 3. Reclaiming her destiny. London woke that morning in a frenzy of scandalous headlines, incessant notifications on the elite cell phones, and urgent calls among the most powerful. The wedding of the year had not only failed, it had imploded before everyone's eyes. The front pages of newspapers were emblazoned with shocking images. Isabel Wright, impeccable in her silk dress, walking out of the Grand Regent Palace with her head held high. Marcus Sterling, alone in the ballroom, with a lost look and humiliation etched on his face. The wedding of the year that ended in disaster. Isabel Wright leaves Marcus Sterling before the honeymoon. The scandal rocked London's high society. Speculation gripped the press and social media. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. The most discreet murmured that Marcus had made an irreparable mistake. Others, more aggressive, suggested he had never been worthy of Isabel. But the most astute had already understood the truth. Marcus Sterling was not who he claimed to be. In the ruthless world of the British elite, real money and lasting power belonged to the Wrights. The Sterlings, on the other hand, were nothing more than an aristocratic surname surviving on appearances. And now, that facade was destroyed. At the polo club where businessmen and politicians gathered, Marcus's name was spoken with contempt over champagne flutes. The same men who had once shaken his hand now treated him like a joke. "I always thought he was overrated," one of the guests commented, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Did he really think he could fool the Wrights? The idiot was left without a wife, without money, and without a reputation in a single night, another replied, laughing sarcastically. Marcus Sterling's fall was complete. Meanwhile, across town, Isabel breathed the fresh air of her freedom. In the penthouse where she took refuge after the disaster, she watched the city skyline with a hot cup of coffee in her hands. She was tired. Yes, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel the burden of living a lie. James entered the living room and threw a newspaper onto the table. "Look at this!" She quickly read the headlines. Marcus was sinking deeper and deeper. "He brought it on himself," she said, without emotion. James sat across from her, crossing his arms. "And you? What are you going to do now?" Isabel brought the cup to her lips and smiled faintly. "I'm going to rebuild myself, but this time, on my own terms." The warm wind of Cornwall blew gently against her skin as Isabel walked barefoot on the fine white sand, feeling its soft texture beneath her feet. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with orange and pink hues, as if the entire universe were welcoming her to her new life. Left behind were the cold marbles, the blinding lights of the ballrooms, the voices full of judgments disguised as courtesy. Left behind was the shadow of Marcus Sterling, the surname that never held more weight than she allowed it to. She stopped in front of the sea, the ebb and flow of the waves creating a hypnotic, constant sound. That's how her soul felt at that moment. She had once been a woman trapped in a golden cage, surrounded by riches, but without true freedom. Now, for the first time, the world belonged to her. She took a deep breath. The salty air filled her lungs, as if purging the last vestiges of the life she had left behind. Her escape from London was not an impulsive act. It was an act of survival. For too long, she had been defined by her surname, by the expectations others had of her. The perfect daughter, the successful businesswoman, the ideal wife. It was all a carefully constructed image, an illusion that had finally collapsed the night she abandoned her own wedding. And in that collapse, she found her freedom. Isabel walked slowly back to the private villa where she had decided to settle for a while. No unnecessary luxuries, no ostentatious decorations, just the essentials. She opened the sliding wooden door and entered her new space. The smell of fresh wood and salt permeated the air. Her suitcases were to one side, still mostly unpacked. She was not in a hurry. For the first time in her life, she had no rigid plan. She didn't have to rush to meet anyone else's expectations. She crossed the living room and reached the small, improvised studio she had set up. An easel with a blank canvas awaited her. Isabel had been surrounded by art for years. Her professional life revolved around discovering and promoting talent, opening spaces for other artists to shine. But in the midst of that world, she had forgotten that she herself once dreamed of creating. Until now. She took a brush and slid it across the palette of colors. Red, blue, yellow. She mixed them between her fingers, feeling the texture of the paint on her skin. It was something real, something no one could take away from her. She had spent her entire life trying to fit into a mold. Now she was ready to break it. She rested the brush on the canvas and began to paint. At first, they were hesitant strokes, small flashes of contained emotion. But as the paint flowed, her hand became firmer, freer. Each brushstroke carried a story. The day she understood that her marriage was not love, but a contract. The moment Marcus humiliated her in front of everyone, believing she would stay silent. The instant she took off her veil and left behind not only the wedding, but the entire charade that her life had been. So many times, she had been told who she should be. Now, she would define herself. She lost herself in the painting, in the sound of the sea in the background, in the freedom she felt by not being tied to anything or anyone. She was not Marcus's wife. She was not the Wright's daughter. She was not a surname, nor a scandal, nor an ornament for society. She was Isabel, a woman rebuilding her life on her own terms. She set the brush aside and picked up her cell phone. Dozens of unread messages. Some from high society acquaintances, pretending to be concerned, but eager to hear the details of the scandal. Others from former partners, cautious, wondering if this media blow would affect her business. She answered none. She owed them nothing. But there was a message from James. Do what you want, Issa. Wherever you are, do it for yourself. She smiled. Her brother had always been her anchor, her protector. But this time she knew she could stand on her own. She stood up and walked to the terrace. The wind caressed her skin, warm, full of promises. She had left her old life in ruins, and from those ruins, she would build something completely new, something that was hers, something no one could take away from her. What had begun as a night of humiliation ended up becoming a symbol of strength. She was no longer afraid. For the first time in her life, the future was hers. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to explore more content on our channel. We have many more exciting and thought-provoking stories that, like this one, aim to inspire you and show you that there is always hope. Click on the next video and join us for another narrative that will surely captivate you from the very first moment. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comment, and share this video with those you think might need it. Thank you for being part of this community. We'll see you in the next video.